Changqing to officials Xue and Liu on leaving Jiangzhou again. How can I follow the excellent imperial edict when all I learned from the world of men is wine and song? While geese from Tartar lands fly over the moonlit river, trees tumble south of Huai, leaving mountains bare. Living contented for a while in a hermit's paradise, who'd respect an old man with hair turned white? Now the imperial bell has rung for all those growing old. In shame, my friends, I warn you, watch out for wind and waves. Okay, so we have finished with Du Fu in this section. We're moving on, and now we have 3 poems by Liu Changqing. Now, Liu Changqing is a sort of silver poet in the middle range, at least in the consideration of this collection's anthologizer. He had 5 poems, if you will remember, in the pentasyllabic regulated poem section. So the compiler probably thought he excelled in that genre. He has 3 now in the heptasyllabic regulated poem section, and he will have 3 more in the pentasyllabic quatrain section for a total of 11. Remember, most poets in this anthology only have like 1 poem or 2, and the greatest of poets have 20 or more than 20, so Liu Changqing would be pretty mid-range. When we presented those 5 poems of his before, we already talked a bit about his biography and his style, but let's make a very quick recapitulation in case you don't remember or haven't watched the previous videos. So Liu Changqing is a, how could we say, he's a transitional poet between the High Tang and the next period. He's not generally included among the Dali era poets, but that period, which is just after the Anlushan rebellion, that period would actually probably fit him best. So he had a very long life, and he just managed to start his official career at the time of the Anlushan rebellion. After the rebellion, he got some postings, mostly in the Sultan Commission in the southeast area of the country, and he had a checkered career with ups and downs, but generally managed to keep to middle-level posts. In his poetry, he is a very good representative of the High Tang style in many aspects, and some would say that precisely because he spent most of the years after the Anlushan rebellion in the provinces, he continued writing, especially his nature poetry, in the style of the High Tang, without incorporating some of the innovations that were being tried at the time in the capitals. He is frequently paired with Wei Jingwu also, and with this type of poetry. And, for the most part, I think the best evaluation of Liu Changqing is that he is a silver poet of a golden age. So he's pretty good for his time, and he would have been probably more relevant in another period of Chinese literary history. But of course, when you fight with the greatest figures of the whole tradition, well, it's obvious that you will probably, occupy a second tier or even a third tier compared to them. So, moving on to the poem we have today. This is a typical poem of a scholar official. It's a parting poem. So this poem was probably written, I have no clear indications in the book or anywhere, but I imagine it would have been written in the 760s, 770s, when Liu Changqing was pretty old for the time. He must have been 60 or 70. And he was called to occupy some positions in the imperial government, in the central government, not in the provinces. So this is a parting poem. Liu Changqing is in Jiangzhou, probably in some official capacity, and he is saying goodbye to 2 officials, Xue and Liu, with whom he probably had contact and a good relationship. So the typical parting poem, and the scholar is going away to serve the emperor. What else can we say about the topics of the poem? Well, the poem describes this travel, this imminent travel that is about to take place, his going to the capital. It has a very strong self-deprecatory tone, which I find excessive and probably a little bit hypocritical. But remember, Chinese poetry, classical Chinese poetry, has a very strong social component, and also the Confucian values of traditional Chinese society implied that self-deprecation and humility were virtues placed in a very, very, very high position. So nobody is expected to be proud and arrogant, not even the emperor. So, when writing a poem to friends saying, I'm going to serve, this self-deprecation is, probably expected. And it's the idea that, I'm not really worthy, but, I'm going to serve in office because the emperor is very generous and so on. So I believe that apart from traveling, self-deprecation is the main topic of this poem. There's an important element of aging, of old age. References to old age are quite continuous in the poem. And finally, there is an undertone of the hermit life, which seems to be the life that Liu Changqing was living or quasi-living before this event, and which is still presented in a positive light, even though, again, we might feel that this is Liu Changqing being a bit hypocritical because he's, after all, quitting that life to go and serve at court. Okay, so with these general ideas about the poem, let's, as usual, take a look at it couplet by couplet. First couplet. How can I follow the excellent imperial edict when all I learned from the world of men is wine and song? So the first poem begins with again, it clearly introduces us to the topic. Liu Changqing has received an edict from the emperor, which summons him to office, but he feels he is unworthy of obeying the edict because he is clueless. He has spent a very long life, but the only thing he has learned is wine and song. So he is, a frivolous, superficial person who hasn't really acquired abilities, knowledge, skills that make him worthy of being summoned, of being a good scholar official. He's just been a party man. And again, he has been obviously hyperbolic here. And from other poems of his, it's pretty clear that he did see himself as deserving of office. But anyway, this image is presented, as I said before, this is in probably a poem composed at a parting party or just for sending to these friends. And it's obviously humble and self-deprecatory, like saying, you are probably worthier than me. You probably deserve being summoned to the capital more than me. But I don't know, I was lucky. Second couplet. Wild geese from Tartar lands fly over the moonlit river. Trees tumble south of Huai, leaving mountains bare. So the second couplet moves us along. It takes us out from the specifics, and it gives us two nature images, both of which convey the idea of movement. And they're meant to stand in to be the nature resonance box of Liu Changqing's move to the capital, which is, very typical in Chinese poetry. There's nature. We've talked about it thousands of times. In Chinese correlative thought, this idea that nature matches, resonates with human social endeavors, or at least the attempt to show it, or to show the contrast when human society or an individual and nature seems to be at odds. There seems to be a dissonance. So here we get two images of nature. The first, and the images evoke very well also a very staple parallelistic contrast that appears already in the 19 old poems. I think in the first or the second one, there is a couplet that goes like, I am in the north next to the Tartar horses, you are in the south hearing the Vietnam birds. So this was a very famous line in the 19 old poems, reflecting a parallelism and a contrast, with one of the lovers being in the extreme north in the barbarian realms, and the other one being in the extreme south, also in barbarian realms. So here we get two images of animals or plants from north and south, with this emphasis on movement, as I said. So wild geese from Tartar lands fly over the moonlit river. Tartar lands were in the north. So we have migrating geese. This indicates that the time of the poem is probably either spring or autumn. It's not mentioned explicitly anywhere else, but it's a time when the migrating geese go north or go south. Probably autumn, no. I would imagine they're flying north. They're from the Tartar lands and they're going north, just as Liu Changqing, who is in the south, is about to go north. And so with these birds flying over a moonlit river, and moonlit, the emphasis on the beauty of the moon is generally an autumn element, but anyway, whatever. So the wild geese are flying. Let's imagine that they're flying north, so thereby following or are anteceding the path that Liu Changqing is about to take. And on the other hand, the trees south of the Huai was the river that marked the boundary between the north and the south of China. The trees south of the Huai are tumbling, they're falling, maybe because, there's some stormy winds at hand. The trees fall, so there's in this case, it's a vertical movement, going down. So not vertical, it's more like horizontal, yeah. And the mountains are empty, just as Liu Changqing is about to leave the south on his quest to the capital, and he's leaving the mountain rather empty. Just as scholar officials, other than Liu Changqing, who might have been mentioned in the excellent imperial edict, are also going north and abandoning their previous positions in the south. The third couplet brings us back again to the main topic of the poem, that is Liu Changqing talking about his imminent departure and his self-deprecatory tone. He says, living contented for a while in a hermit's paradise, who'd respect an old man with hair turned white? So he's telling us, I've been living a hermit-like life, if not 100% as a hermit, because, he had different positions while in the south for most of his lifetime, although he had some rustications between postings. But he's saying, so I've been enjoying the quiet life of the hermit, and now that I'm going back to office, back to the red dust of the world, I'm not going to be taken seriously. I'm an old man. They'll think this is a bumbling old fool who knows nothing, and who has been giving a post at the capital for no meritorious reasons. Again, this is hyperbolically self-deprecatory. I mean, Liu Changqing was a man with experience in office and with a very good ability at literary composition, which probably played a no small part in his calling back to the capital. And finally, the last couplet. Again, it emphasizes, it summarizes, it wraps up the same ideas that have been flowing, that have been developing all through the poem of lack of merit, old age, service, and so on. Now the imperial bell has rung for all those growing old. In shame, my friends, I warn you, watch out for wind and waves. So he says, again, the imperial bell, like the imperial edict, has rung. It's calling all the old men to court, including me, so not the meritorious ones, but the old ones. So I go to court feeling a bit of shame because, in my old age and after my hermit life, perhaps I should prefer to continue with the retired life, and yet I am going to occupy courtly positions. So he warns his friends, he's telling them, I'm a little bit ashamed at going back to the world, and anyway, you be careful, watch out for wind and waves. Where wind and waves, I imagine, are a metaphor for the dangers of serving in office, for the dangers of public service. So it feels like a little bit of a hypocritical comment to make at the end, so that might explain the shame of Liu Changqing, like, do as I say, don't do what I do. On the other hand, he might just be trying to be flattering and friendly to some friends who have not been summoned to office. He has, they haven't, and so he's trying to play down his assent by saying, I'm going into a world of dangers and I'm a bumbling old fool, and anyway, it's not so good to go to court because you will be beset by dangers. So, pretty conventional piece, pretty interesting, excessively self-deprecatory for my liking, but then again, I'm a Westerner and I have a different set of values, even though I value humility very highly.